is happening? Man, we out here on Streambird now. We got it. We're giving it to you every which way that we can via the pod. We're on YouTube now, Periscope. We're going to hit you on Twitter. We're going to hit you on so many different channels. It is ridiculous. It's episode 56, and I am here with my co-host, Kevin Steele, at FantasyRap13 is where you can find him on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at RyanAlexander_W. And Kev, it's a new season, 2019, 2015, and we're out here giving the DJ Nationers something to look at, man. This is nice here.
I know, right? I know. We're moving up in the world. You know, we're taking it next level. You know, I really love this, what StreamYard has done for with this platform. We just found it a couple weeks ago and kind of played around with it. And now, you know, we used it last night on the TFA podcast as we did our mock draft. And now here we are. You know, this is going to be so money come in season because we'll actually be able to do this live every week, and we'll be able to put up you know, different things, and we'll be able to actually see what we're doing. And so I'm pretty excited about this. And also, I think we're going to have some stuff we're going to be doing on just some stuff for YouTube as well, where we're putting YouTube videos out. So we got a lot coming this season.
Yeah, a lot coming indeed, Kevin. I was so excited when you hit me up and said that this is what we were going to be using in season. I see that, you know, you, Anthony, Cody are using this last night, and just the interaction that you guys are having with everybody. Not just on the YouTube stream as we're accustomed to doing, but on Periscope, on Twitter, getting retweets for the pod. It's just great. And it's going to be great for our DJ Nation fam that's been with us for, I mean, you know, over a year now. It's so exciting. So I'm just excited to, you know, give the people what they want and to have multiple avenues to, you know, give people content. And that they can put the faces with the people who are talking too, Kev. It's like, you know, they see that your takes are so bad, and then they look at you and they're like, oh man, he's just cuddly teddy bear. Like his takes can't be that bad. He can't be all that bad. But you know, it is what it is, guys. It is what it is. But DJ Nation, we are excited here. It's episode 56, as I said, and we're basically just going to break down strategy and ways to attack DFS. We're a week away, Kev, now that as we're recording this, from the season kicking off. It's not going to be the full main slate, so to speak, unless you're playing the Thursday included there. A lot of Millie tournaments going on. A lot of people are excited to play that first game, Bears versus Packers. I will not be playing that. Just my heart's too invested into it. So I'm just excited to get Sunday rolling around. But we got to talk strategy. We got to talk ways to build lineup roster construction, lineups. Whether you're new to DFS, whether you've been with us for a year, whether you've been playing DFS for years, and just are looking for new ways to attack things, because it's a grind, right, Kev? Like, it's not just you pick this up one day, you're going to be winning millions and millions of dollars, and then, you know, sailing off into the sun, just counting your money like Leonardo on the boat there in Wolf of Wall Street. You really got to grind at this, and there's so many different ways to attack it. NFL is so hard. I think it's one of the hardest just because there's so many touts and so many ways to attack, so many avenues that people can go to find content. So it really comes down to, you know, not only being a smart DFS player, not only, you know, being good at DFS, quote unquote, but really just surrounding yourself with knowledge and information to build lineups. So let me stop talking and let's just hear from you, Kev, on why do you play DFS? Like, what is exciting to you about DFS for people who aren't playing it regularly? Like, what is it that gets you excited to play? How is it different from just regular fantasy football? And why is it an investment that you've chose to make?
Well, I started playing DFS. I think it's been about 4 years now. And I first started out as just natural curiosity, wanted to know what it was about. And, you know, as things kind of progressed, it's become almost like it's like my first love now in terms of fantasy football, mainly because I think the weekly puzzle that it is to try to put together that optimal lineup. I am much more of a GPP player. I think I've put in like probably 10 cash lineups my entire, time playing. It's just not my thing. Just the way my mind operates, the way my mind works. I'm always looking at things in that perspective. And so it's, for me, it's GPPs. And I know, years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, cash was really where you had an edge. Now, I don't think that's so much the case anymore. Like, cash has become so kind of oversaturated now that either you're playing in like the low stakes cash games, or, if you try to play in anything relatively decent size, you're going to be in there with all the sharks, guys that are running 150 lineup trains, and just boxing you out. And so for me, like, I just think GPPs are the way to go. Now, when we say that, like, that's not, you don't go run to the $3 2.5 million where you're playing against 400,000 people. Like, that's just bad strategy. That's bad approach, because the chances are you're not going to, are very low stakes. Plus, you're playing against that kind of people. You're going to lose your money really quickly. It's finding the proper, contest selection. I think that really sets a lot of people apart. I would much rather play in single entry, 3 entry max. I know Maddie, who is our third member, part-time member this year. I guess we haven't really talked about that, but he will be on again this year. This won't be as much as in the past, but he will be on, and so we are looking forward to that. But he is much more of a cash game, 3 entry max type of guy. Like, that's just the way he does stuff. He usually has one lineup for the week. I typically do things a little bit differently than that, and so for me, like, one of my favorite tournaments to play in, I think, is the $5 and the $9. Like, I really like playing in those. I think they're, you have to really look at rake and things like that. So, but just for me, like with DFS, like I said, it's just that weekly grind of trying to really grind it out. And, especially when you get those sweats, like, there's nothing better than that 3 o'clock slow sweat. You have a couple lineups that are crushing, and you're flying up the board, and, you're really starting to sweat. Like, there's nothing like it. And, so, I've come close to breaking some items, after, something, didn't go my way. Like
100%.
Yeah.
100%, Kev. Yeah, I hear you. It is frustrating, but that's why we play, right? Doing fantasy football just regularly is like so frustrating. Setting your lineups week in and week out and thinking, you have the perfect team right after the draft, and injuries happen or scenarios happen that you didn't expect. And it's just so much more elevated on the DFS landscape when you're playing for just that one day. Doesn't matter, who you drafted, doesn't matter what your regular season drafts are looking like, your teams are looking like. You just want the best players on any given day to just help you rake in the money. And you hit it on the head with, not rushing in and just looking at the prize pool and saying, oh my God, if I get first, it's $1 million. If I get first, it's 100K. If I get first, yada, yada, yada. That is ultimately what the goal should be. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to see green, right? I think both of us like preach that, if you're just hitting the green, if you're making back your investment or doubling up or tripling up or, exponentially growing that, building that bankroll, I think that's a way to be a success. And that's what the best players in DFS have done. They're not always hitting first, but they are consistently building lineups that are in the running or that are at least cashing in the mix. And so, for me, same way, Kev, I've probably been playing DFS for around 4 years too. And I've made some mistakes. I've made some egregious errors of just throwing money away on the site, just chasing that number one prize pool. And I've had a lot of success on whether it be shorter slates when there's not a lot of players to choose from. And that I'm big on being contrarian. I like playing plays that are going to be low owned. I write an article that's based off of contrarian plays, and that, can really do wonders for you on shorter slates, on the primetime slate that we used to play on Showdown slates. So, but when you're playing in these prime slates, 10, 12 games, 14 games, you really kind of have to just let your biases stray aside and just make smart teams and getting into, like you said, I know the slant that you're talking about, Kev, the $9, I think it's a minimum threshold for this, or, if you get in the cash, you double up your money. And so things like that, where you're at least, doubling up your money when you're hitting or getting into single entry tournaments that we've talked about a lot on the DJ Nation pod or in our Slack chat. When you're playing in the single entry tournaments, it's your one bullet and that's it. Everybody else only has one. And when you're playing in these bigger player pools where there's 400,000 people in there, 10,000 people in there, 14,000 people, and they can max enter 150 times, well, the normal person is not going to max enter a $20 entry 150 times. Like, that's just a lot of money to be spending in one day. But you're going against people that have the capital to do so. And so you want to find those, $100 player or 100 people player tournaments where you can at least, see some equity if you're a low stakes player. Now, if you're a high stakes player, by all means, have at it. If you think that you have a core build, then do the, $3 20 max, chasing the 2.5, as Kev saying. Do the milli 10 times, 20 times if you think you can hit it. But it's really about knowing yourself and knowing what you can afford to lose, because you will lose at some point. It's not always a win. So you have to be comfortable with taking some L's every now and then.
No, of course. And I mean, you have to understand it's a weekly, it's a weekly grind. And I feel like that, you don't, especially, I think we could talk about just week one in general, because I think we wait all off season for this. A lot of people don't grind out, MLB over the summer and NASCAR and, golf and tennis and like there's just MMA. Like there's so many different options of things you can play. And I don't think most people do that, or I shouldn't say most, but, there's a good amount of that don't, and that just strictly play NFL, and you've been waiting and it finally here, and then you see all these huge contests, and it's easy to get yourself carried away a little bit and, see these huge payouts up top, and that's what you want to get into. But like, I think you just have to take a step back and really, you don't, like we say, you don't want to blow your load all in 1 week, because depending on, what your situation is, not all people can't afford financially to, drop 100, 200, 300, whatever it is a week, whatever you're wanting to play. So, I think because and especially week one, we really don't have all the answers to the test yet. Like we're still kind of basing most of our opinions off of last year. And so I think playing a little bit lighter, which is very hard to do, but if you can make that happen and that's what you can do, then I think that that's probably the most optimal approach, especially for week one.
Yeah, and sticking on week one, let's just talk about it just from what we feel comfortable with, kind of what we're doing, what we're looking to attack. So I'll start it off, Kev. Like for instance, for me, I think last year, week one, I probably put in maybe 150. I think is what I did, and I'm a big proponent of. I like to max enter those smaller lineups because I like to just be able to change things. So I'm not like Maddie. I don't just build like 1 or 2, 3 teams and like that's it and feel comfortable, because I'm always looking at research and I'm like, oh man, if I can get this stack in there, if I can get this guy or whatever. I do like to have a condensed player pool, but I do like to switch it up just in case, I'm playing Cleveland. Okay, OBJ and Baker might not hit the way I want it to, but maybe maybe Baker and Jarvis will hit, or maybe Baker and Chubb will be the play with Njoku or things of that nature. So if I like something, I try to attack it from multiple ways. And so that's where my low entry fields allow me to do so. But then I also like to play like the $27 single entry. I like to always build 1 milli team. I like to get into as many single entries as possible, the $5 single entry, the $12 single entry, and just keep my core the same in those lineups, and maybe just change up 1 or 2 things. Maybe it's, I'm torn between 2 defenses, or maybe I'm torn between the tight end, but I have a stack that I love. So trying to multiple enter in that way. I think is really smart. I think, you first want to build your core and see what's out there, and then what you feel comfortable with and putting in. I think this year, I haven't really decided what my threshold is going to be, because I usually start with the so like if I start with 150, then I'm trying to just make that money stretch pretty much like the whole season. So I'm trying to double that up in week one, go back and use 150 in week 2, go back, you know what I'm saying? Keep that going. So I don't have to deposit every single time, which inevitably does happen, but it probably won't be that much down the road. So I just try and either make that money back and then keep playing with that money, or just start again with that new pool. So that's the way I like to attack it. I'm one of the guys that I don't really keep a huge bankroll in that sense as well on the site, because I like to keep track of the winnings and what's coming in. So as soon as I make 150 back or more, I'm only taking off that initial investment again. So I take out that 150. That way, if I have to deposit again, I know that it's coming out of that original amount. And you know what I'm saying? I'm not just having it on the site tempting me to play and build all these lineups. I'm just playing with the money that I've made exponentially over that. So I'm curious to see like what your plan is for week one, how you're looking to attack it. Not so much from a monetary value, but are there contests that are sticking out to you outside of the slant that you're looking to get into, and kind of, you know, are you going to just say I'm playing X amount and leave it at that so you have more money in, or kind of what's your take on just investing every week, or just doing one initial investment from the first week and then letting that be your whole season?
So for me, I think some of the ones that I've already got into, the ones that I've already that I'm at 100% the slant. I love that one. 50K to first, two times min cash. I think that's one that I'll have some interest in. I really like the NFL 150K nickel, the 3 entry max, $5 entry. I put 3 entries into that every single week. That's one of my favorite. There's also the 40K dime back single entry, which is a $6 buy-in. That's another one that I really like. 40K total prize pool. There's 7,000 people in there, 7,800. So there's some really good contests. We're going to get more. I also do a lot of the, you know, early only, afternoon only type slates as well. I think that's another way to just kind of differentiate yourself a little bit and, you know, get some different exposures to some different things, especially if there's, you know, I love, especially the afternoon only slate. I just feel like there's some edge there as well. So
Yes.
for me, like that's kind of where I kind of mix it up between, and then I'm also, and I've grown to, and we'll probably talk about this more later, but I really starting to love the showdown slates. I don't play them like on the main slate. I just play them like the Thursday night and then the Sunday and Monday nights. I basically, that's where I get all my exposure to showdowns. I don't really typically, though I probably should look more into it because my love for the showdown, and I think that there is some real edge there with it. But for me, I think that's kind of where I'm at. I kind of mix it all up. Like I'm not like you mentioned, like Mike Maddie, who wants to put in just one lineup or 2 lineups in a week. I'm more of a, you know, I have my player pool and I'm going to, you know, kind of mix it out from there. Are you somebody that utilizes, you know, likes to use like a lineup optimizer, or are you much more of a hand, you know, you like to make all your lineups by your hand?
Yeah, I'm a traditionalist. I go to work with a pad and a pen every day. I write stuff down. I don't really keep notes on my computer all too much. Although I will say that like I do have an Excel document that I keep week by week to keep my notes. And obviously we have notes for the pod on the doc as well. But I then take that knowledge, because I just grew up a believer, like the more you write it down, the more it's in your head. And so I take what notes I've made on the computer, and then I go into my notebook, and then I make notes off of the slate, off of my notebook. And then I have a particular notebook that is just my notebook where I'm building my lineups off of that. So each sheet is like a new week or a new page, or 2 sheets, however many lineups I'm putting in. Because I think that process, just for me, for example, it lends me to not get off my original thoughts early in the week. So I know a lot of the times people say, oh, don't build your lineups too early because you don't want news to affect that later on, and things of that nature, which is true. I do agree with that at some point, but I do love thinking about things earlier on in the week. And then as I've gone and progressed through the week, like if something changes, I go back and I'm like, okay, but why am I not still on this attack, for example? So for example, Kev, I know you've talked a lot about Arizona, the cornerbacks being out and wanting to attack that. And so I think that's a great idea. I think that you want to attack the corners on the team with the receivers, but we could get news like later on. And I don't know this, so obviously I'm just spitballing, but like, let's just say DeAndre Hopkins is out for week 1 or something like that, somebody who's massively on the slate. So now I'm like, oh, shoot, I'm trying to jam in like Will Fuller anywhere I can get him. We're trying to attack those plays, and I could start building lineups that totally forget about that knowledge that I had privy to those corners being out and wanting to get exposure to Detroit. So I feel like if I'm writing that down, if I'm keeping track of that, I do tend to remember some of those things as well. And then yeah, I'm 100% with you. Like, I like hand building lineups. I do tend to look at optimizers just in the sense of I like to know owner percentages, especially for the article that I write too. I just like to see where the field's going, kind of where they're trying to attack, and seeing if there's any ways to be a little bit contrarian off of that, or if there's another play that sticks out to me. If DeAndre Hopkins is high owned, but he's being shadowed, is there a way that I can take advantage of Will Fuller? Is there a way that I can take advantage of whoever's playing in the slot for Houston against them or what have you? So I do think there's merit to using those tools. I did want to talk about the tools that we use, and just, I think that PFF has a great toolkit. If you're paying for the elite on Pro Football Focus, I think it's well worth the dollars. They have an optimizer tool on there. Obviously, we know, or not obviously, but we know that there's the wide receiver cornerback matchup chart that they use, which is amazing for DFS purposes. I do use fantasy football calculator. They have a DFS toolkit as well that comes with an optimizer, that comes with ownership percentages. I think it's about like $20 a month or something like that. But I feel confident using their tools. And then Fantasy Pros is another one that I like. I catch myself using some of their tools as well too. And just, and I think one of the initial things too, Kev, is Game Pass. We've talked about this like numerous times, using NFL Game Pass, which is really not that expensive. I pay for it monthly, but there's an annual fee. It's $100. But like, to be able to go back and watch film and to see all that stuff on tape, and I'm watching Red Zone just like the next person, and but I'm trying to watch the Bears too every week, and I just don't see every game. So like, going back and seeing, okay, how was Tyler Lockett able to take advantage of this position, or what did Kerryon do to take advantage? It's not just looking at box scores, like to actually see the film, to see something that gets called back, which isn't always shown in the box scores. If somebody breaks off a 60-yard run, but it's called back for holding, I want to see that. Like, I want to know about that, because that might be something to take advantage of the next week against that defense. So those are the main tools that I use. What are some other ones that I know you use, Kev? I know you're big into looking at people's snap counts and looking at the routes run and things like that. Where can people find that?
That's also on Pro Football Focus. So I think Pro Football Focus, like, I'd be remiss not to give a shout out to our boy Matty and TQE, which is where he writes for the Quant Edge. I know they have a lot of really good tools. They're doing a lot of amazing stuff over there. I mean, I think every year they've really done a pretty good job of really kind of updating things there. So I do think that they are another place you can go. But as far as Pro Football Focus goes, they're in depth, like, and you can really dig into some of the stuff. They have their signature stats. Like, if you get the Pro Football Focus Elite package, which it is pricey. I think it's on $199. I guess we should try to partner with Pro Football. We're just shouting them out. But I think they have like a $50 off code right now or something like that too, if you want to utilize them. But there's so much information on there. Shout out to Evan Silva. I was trying to figure out where he was finding like routes run for like tight ends and like slot and all this stuff, and I was having trouble finding it. So I reached out to him, and he hooked me up with like an actual like it's like, I think it's like I don't think it's like somewhere like you have to like have the link to be able to find it. And he sent it to me, and I use that religiously to look at like, how many routes run certain tight ends are running on a weekly basis, because I think that matters far more than just what their snap count is. Because I mean, they could be out there playing 97% of the snaps, but if they're only playing, running 20 routes, then I mean, it's not nearly as, but you can look at another guy who maybe he's only playing 40% of the snaps, but he ran 30 routes. Like, it tells you a lot more of the story. I think air yards is super important when we're talking about running or wide receivers and tight ends. And quarterbacks to a certain extreme as well. So I mean, there's a lot of places that you can kind of look for these things, and I think that really matter, because really all we really care about is opportunity and and touches, right? It's literally it's not rocket science. I think there's some things that that we look at. I have built my hashtag brand off of coming up with some of these off the radar dark horse plays where on the podcast, you guys are like, you're crazy, don't play this guy. And then, he goes out and smashes. Shout out Dan Arnold. Last year, well, me and Maddie will always remember the Dan Arnold week last year where we were all about Dan Arnold. And it happened organically. And it's one of the things I think I love about this podcast is because we kind of dig very much deeper than most, right? Most people kind of will tell you about the top plays. We dig super deep into the slate, and we were going through and looking at everything. We were looking at that game, and just organically, we're looking at like, oh, let's look at his air yards. Oh man, okay, his air yards look really good. Okay, let's look at his routes run. Okay, actually, he's been running more routes than Josh Hill. Like, oh my God, it's Dan Arnold week, and we called it out, and it worked. He scored a touchdown, and he was like 2% owned or something like that. So. But I think that you have to, if you're going to play GPPs, especially, and as you start getting into the higher tiers of how many people are playing in them. If you're playing in the Millie Maker, like you have to come up with some line, like you have to have at least some exposure to some of those players. You don't want to go too crazy. I think some people go too contrarian. Like that's not really ideal.
Yeah.
If the best plays are still the best plays, and you can fade and at your own risk, but you're probably not going to take it down. I think when you look at most Millie Makers, a lot of the plays are pretty obvious throughout the week, and I think some of them are highly owned. But then there's just a few slight differentials for the most part that set those lineups apart. So, and I think that's one thing that I think works out for us is that I feel like that all of us are a little bit different. I'm extreme contrarian, and I feel like you and Maddie are a little bit more balanced. And also I guess we should also shout out Ben Cummins. He's also going to be on some of our shows this year too. I don't know yet, but yeah, we got a pretty fire rotation, so it's going to be and Ben and Maddie throughout the year of being on the weekly show. So.
That's hot. Yeah, we're trying to do big things here at the DJ Nation. If you're just tuning in, DJ Nation podcast, episode 56, we're talking strategy for DFS, ways to kind of get an edge on the field, how we're going about building lineups every week, and just what are the optimal ways to kind of get a return on your investment. And Kev, let's talk about roster construction for a second here, or it might be longer because it is the DJ Nation pod. I was going to make a joke about, we do get into those plays organically. It might be an hour and 10 in, but we get to those plays organically eventually. But let's talk about roster construction and kind of what ways are you looking to attack when you're doing your research, when you're building your teams for DFS? Are you a guy that really likes to, get your quarterback first, and then I play the quarterback, and then I'm going after his number one target, and that's kind of where I want to start? Because I know a lot of people, maybe more so for cash or more so for lower tournaments or lower field entries, but taking the quarterback and just you take Matt Ryan, you get Julio. You take Phillip Rivers, you get Keenan Allen. Those type of correlations there. Are you looking to, always play 3 running backs? Or are you looking for 4 wide receivers? Are you a believer in the 2 tight end strategy? What are we doing for defense? Like, how do you go about building your lineups and attacking things when you're first getting into the slate?
Well, the first thing I try to go back and look at is basically I try to look at the Vegas totals, see what we're looking at, and I think looking at it at the beginning of the week really helps you kind of get an idea of kind of where things stand, and then following those line movements, because then you guys start to get an idea of where that smart money is starting to come in at. And I think that there's an edge in that. A lot of people want to target, let's say Chiefs, whoever the Chiefs are playing really on a weekly basis. I think, that's, always going to be one of the highest totals on the slate, but following that, but then there's something to be said about those games that are kind of like in those middle tiers where, picking out value from there, picking out players. But I try to start there, look to see, who's on the slate that week, and kind of look at the totals, look at the implied point totals for the week. And then kind of, okay, now I start to narrow down my, what pool of games that I really want to play. And then really start to narrow down my pool after that. Like I don't necessarily start at quarterback or running back or wide receiver or tight end, but there's certainly a lot of different ways that you can quote unquote skin the cat, if you will, in terms of there's not one really right or wrong lineup construction strategy, really. You can definitely see people that there's certain weeks where taking 2 tight ends is certainly optimal. There's the, trying to double dip with certain things. Like we know if you take a defense and you try to run it back, let's say like a Tyreek Hill, who is also an optimal strategy because, he returns punts. One of the other, stacks, a lot of people, actually pairing a quarterback and a running back together, playing like, for example, week 1, we haven't, we'll be talking about that next week on week 1 show with Maddie, but right now, like, I really like the Carolina Panthers next week. And I think, running a Cam Newton, CMC, and, and either Curtis Samuel or DJ Moore, I don't think I would play all 3 or all 4, I should say, but picking which one you want to go with there. And I think that's really they're going against the Rams, should be, relatively high scoring. Cam Newton appears to be healthy and, kind of getting basically all the exposure to the touchdowns there. We know that the CMC is heavily involved as a pass catcher as well. So, like, I think there's just different ways that you can go about it. It just really depends on the slate, and it depends on, the way things look. Because I think everybody that has been doing this long enough, as soon as you look at the slate, you can pretty much kind of pick out. We do it every week on our Slack chat, which we have. That's free. All you have to do is reach out to us. But where at the beginning of the week, like Monday rolls around and we're Monday or Tuesday, or really even Sunday night, because they usually release it Sunday night after the primetime game starts that next week. And we're already looking at next week. And it's not hard to see who's going to be the values, who's going to be the good plays. And then I think one underrated thing, and one thing I try never to do, is I try to go through and kind of start my player pool without listening to, other podcasts or doing other, like, reading anything. I don't want any outside noise whenever I'm trying to, build my, I want to get all my information. And then I think there is something to be said about going and listening to, another podcast, and it's kind of seeing who they're on. And if they're on some plays that you're not necessarily, taking what they're saying as gospel, but trying to look into it to see maybe what you missed and what, did you miss something in your research and things like that. So I think those are certain things that you can do to try to gain an edge. But ultimately what it comes down to, in my opinion, is ultimately who, or how much you're playing and what you're on. Because everything we talked about what tools and what you want to invest in. But if you're playing, let's say $20 a week, just because you enjoy playing, I don't think I would ever go out and advise anybody to get a subscription to somewhere or pay for a sub, because the investment you're making isn't probably worth that. I feel like that there's enough content you could probably play with. But if you're somebody who's willing to pay, if you're going to play $200, $300, $400, $500 a week, then that's totally different. So, but I think just having a strict process, following that process, tweaking it, you should be learning every year. We learn new stuff every year as more information comes in, as we start to, figure out more tighter process on, how that you want to, operate with your bankroll and your strategies, like, what contests that you want to attack. I think all those things play a factor, but at the end of the day, it's all about just winning that money, right?
All about winning that money, man. We counting the hundreds, Kev. Counting the thousands. No, you said it best. That's what we do here at DJ Nation. We're DJ Nation fam. One person spikes, it feels like we all spike. Shout out to everybody who's been in the chat with us. I mean, my goodness, Josh Cole, we got TJ, Pennywell in there, all these guys who have been with us for a long time. Stepney, obviously, Ben Cummins. I know he's been in the chat too. Huge supporter of the pod and what we've been doing. So, we just like to, groupthink is taught to be a bad thing, I think, sometimes, but sometimes it could be a good thing. I think we have conversations in there where, a lot of people are talking about something. Somebody will chime in and say, hey, I don't really agree with that, or this is what I found. And you start to see people jump ship, or, oh, I didn't look at it that way, and things of that knowledge. So we're all having an open conversation, and not just, oh, Kev says Dan Arnold's a play, we're bashing him like he's dumb. I mean, people will be in there and be like, Kev, Dan Arnold, are you serious? That was me. But, you start to get reasoning behind it. And, everybody's in there, I think, knowledgeable and at least coming in to support their claims. They're not just throwing out outlandish things and just saying you should play this person because I said so. They're actually backing it up with data, backing up with points. And, it's been fun. It's a fun ride, and I'm really looking forward to this season, because I think we got some good good-minded people in there, level-headed people, and people who just want to win. And that, at the end of the day, I think is what will support everybody in being successful for the DGen Nation. So yeah, we're talking lineup construction, we're talking roster construction, and kind of how to play things. Kev, I know you religiously advocate for DraftKings. We got people out there that play FanDuel, Fantasy Draft. I've been talking about them for a long time, and now they're out there talking about, giving out tickets in preseason to their entries and really trying to build up their name. And I've seen a couple podcasts kind of tout them and them be sponsoring them. So that's really cool to see, because I don't think too many people know about Fantasy Draft. So that's another edge, right? Is like playing on sites like Fantasy Draft and Yahoo and things that aren't the FanDuel and DraftKings, where commercials are out and everybody's talking about them on pods and things of that nature. You could have an edge in that regard. It's different. Both Yahoo and Fantasy Draft are very different in how they treat the player pools and pricing and things of that nature. But if there's something that you like and you kind of want to throw, $10 on there, $25 on there, and see how you do, I think that's definitely a way to attack. Is just knowing the sites and knowing where people are and how they're going to be. If it's a respected site and people are talking about them, but there's overlay every week, like Fantasy Draft, there was always overlay in the $25 entry, and the prize pools weren't as big as DraftKings and FanDuel, but still, money is money, right? So Yahoo too, I know during the NBA season, Yahoo had huge overlays in NBA too as the season went on, and it's a big thing too to talk about, Kev, is once the season goes on, less people are playing, right? So baseball's still in the mix. So people might, when baseball playoffs start up and people have invested most of their money in week one and they don't hit, or they get to week two and then they lose it all again. It really, like, the sweet spot, I think, for me in NFL is weeks 3 to 6, because then, especially with the Vegas information, we're getting solid plays from Vegas. I feel like solid lines and solid information, and we've seen these teams for a couple of weeks, so we kind of know what their tendencies are, and we see how the new coaches are kind of playing players, and we see that preseason things might not matter so much as they do now in the regular season, as people get excited about all these players who pop off in preseason. I'm one of them too, but we actually get to see the real players take form. So yeah, just knowing the sites and getting invested and kind of just doing your research in that regard, I think is very key too.
Yeah, one thing that you mentioned was the overlay, and I think that is a huge key. And I think there's a lot of people who are smart who will, kind of go overlay hunting, right about before lock. You have 30 minutes left before lock, and going and finding those, because some of those have such huge overlay where it basically pays for the rake, where the rake is gone and there's no rake, because of how many interest. Like you said, Yahoo was huge for that last year, and a lot of people never really took advantage of that. A lot of people aren't paying attention to that; they're not going to look for those things, and those are certain things that you can do to kind of gain an edge. Another thing that is very underrated is kind of, if you are somebody who plays on both FanDuel and DraftKings, and kind of going and looking to see where everybody's priced at, because let's say that 1 week you're really high on Joe Mixon, and Joe Mixon on DraftKings is 7,200, but on FanDuel he's only 5,600 or something like that, or whatever. And if there's a big price discrepancy there, a lot of people will basically, they'll go to FanDuel and really hammer some GPPs or whatever there, and gaining that, you're getting that value, on one site and really, hitting that. But it really depends on, again, your bankroll, and if you're able to do things like that, because there's certain little things you can do like that can really help you out. So for me, I think there's just a lot of different ways to do this, but I cannot fucking wait until next week. Like, I am.
There it is. For the F-bomb drops, baby.
Yeah, well, I've been waiting for this. Like, I played the first 2 weeks of the preseason and loved it, and then got me a little taste, but it wasn't the full thing, and
appetizer.
Yeah, it was just the tip, and now
I love it.
Yeah.
Blow your load, the tip, F-bombs. Kev's ready. Kev's ready. Take the wheels off. This is where Kev gets to be himself. They keep the handcuffs on him, Cody and Anthony, for the Fantasy Authority podcast. God bless them. And they got to reel him in. And this is where Kev just gets to let loose and be lit. And I just love it. I love it, Kev. Let's talk about player pools, because I do want to get back to like the showdowns and how you were talking about the early versus the afternoon slates before we close it out. But player pools, when you're building your player pool, what are you comfortable with in saying is a comfortable player pool for you? So let's just, for DraftKings, you have 9 slots, right, to kind of put the lineup together, put all the pieces together, and kind of build something that's going to hit. So, when you get into your wide receivers, your running backs, are you limiting yourself for the number of running backs that you're taking? Are you trying to get, a couple of wide receivers in there, because wide receiver position is so volatile and you don't always need the expensive guys to hit? It's really like the cheap guys, the shots in the dark that you take on, who Kenny Stills is 3,500 and he goes out and catches 2 bombs and puts up a 25-pointer day for DraftKings, something like that. How comfortable are you in setting a cap on your player pool? And where do you think it gets to be too much? For me, for example, like I'm probably only rolling out 3 to 4 quarterbacks, and that's it. So every slate that I'm dealing with, I'm trying to just build around stacks for those quarterbacks, if it even is, 4. I usually land 3 is my sweet spot. I try to rotate 3 in and then build off of that. And so I kind of just let my player pool dictate itself off of that. I really don't like playing too many defenses. I think you just get caught up, and it's so annoying when you have a great team that you built around, but the defense puts up 2. So I usually will stick with 1 or 2 defenses. And just keep it like that. So really, I just find myself, kind of really building around the wide receivers and letting them kind of grow my pool, because I'm trying to be so strict and stingent on how I'm playing quarterback, tight end, and defense. But for you, what are you dealing with when you get to your player pools?
I definitely try to keep a tight player pool. So for me, I typically look at it like I try to play anywhere from 3 to 4 quarterbacks, probably 6 to 8 running backs. Same for wide receivers, and like 2 or 3 tight ends and a couple defenses. There's other weeks that I might be much tighter than that I just feel like I'm really on a couple of players, but it just really depends on the week. And with attacking defenses, for example, I think there's some, underrated things that you can do there. We kind of talked about this last season with the podcast, where a lot of people will look at certain, like if a game's projected to be like high scoring and the highest scoring on the slate, well, sometimes you want to attack those defenses and actually use those defenses, because really it kind of goes the same for DFS. We're looking for on that weekly basis, we're looking for opportunities. We're looking at opportunities. So if it's a high scoring, fast paced game, you're going to get much more opportunity for that defense to, create sacks, to, create turnovers, to get those pick sixes or fumble recoveries for the touchdown. And we saw a lot last year. I remember the Rams and the Rams and Chiefs game, which was, one of the highest scoring games on the season, was just insane. But the defenses scored so many points, even though they gave up so much, because they were just out there making so many plays. There were turnovers, there were defensive touchdowns. And so, where a lot of people will shy away from wanting to play those defenses, there's actually a lot of edge there, because again, opportunity wins everything. And, if those defenses are going to be on the field a lot, like that's an opportunity to jump on and target. Like there's a lot of weeks last year where you'd go and we'd want to play the 2K defenses, not just because they're 2K, but because they were in good spots to be able to, to maximize that, even though, it was a terrible matchup on paper that, maybe they're going to get, that team is looking to, be a high scoring game and they're going to give up a lot of points, where I think a lot of people will want to try to target games like, target the Bills or, a team's playing like that just because it's a poor offense. But there's also something to be said about these other games, within defenses as well. So for me, like I said, I try to really keep it, 3 quarterbacks, maybe 4, just really depends on the week. And then, 6 to 8, running backs and wide receivers. I just try, but I highly recommend trying to keep a tight pool, to not go over that. If you're just kind of all over the place, the chances of you actually taking something down is very slim. To really take down a tournament, if you have a really tight core and that core hits, you are having a great week. And, and if you're playing a lot of tournaments, you don't need to necessarily, you're never going to be profitable every week. But if you have that one spike week, it's going to make your entire season. So
Right.
you just have to stick with the process, stick with your process, as we say, process over results. And I think that really matters a lot. And, tweak it, make some changes to it if it's not working or something happened. There's been weeks where I've went 2 or 3 weeks when you just like, you want to give up, you want to quit, not play anymore. And then you go on a heater and, you have a nice solid month and you kind of rebuild your bankroll and you start crushing it again. So, like I said, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and, try to just kind of, work your way through it and go from there.
Yes, definitely a marathon, not a sprint. And like you said, the process is key. You cannot, everybody has their own method to the madness, and that's all well and good. Just do not falter from that. If you think that 3 running back strategy is the way to go and you play that week 1 and you're like, why did this not hit? This was what was working for me last year. I'm so frustrated. I just lost my entire bankroll. I just lost what I put in or what have you. Like, do not let that falter. Sometimes things just don't go that way. But if it's worked for you in the past, if it's working for you more than half of the time, then stick it out and stick with it. And just know that, 1 week it'll come. And so, yeah, you definitely got to be patient in DFS. This is definitely an art. It's not a learned skill, I guess, in some capacities, but it's not a math equation. You can't just solve the puzzle just by doing X, Y, Z and getting to an end goal. It's just not going to happen that way. All right, Kev, before we wrap it up here, as we're getting to time, let's kind of just briefly talk about this showdown slates. I know these are some of your favorites. Primetime slates used to be our favorites. I love them. We would talk about them every week, and they kind of moved into these showdown slates or these single game slates. I know it's referred to as on FanDuel, where you're basically just playing one game and that's it. You're taking the players from one game. You're trying to pick a captain spot where I'm not sure if it's different on FanDuel. I think it's 1.5 on both sides, the multiplier for that captain spot. And then, building around from there. I know you love it. What's the way that you try to attack the slate? We talked about it in the chat over the off season and into preseason about what's optimal, and people are talking about taking both of the defenses, taking both of the kickers, and just picking 2 other players when you're playing cash. And then in GPPs, I think it's pretty much just, fair game, whatever you're feeling at that point in time. I know you've come close to taking down the showdown, but I want to talk this briefly, and then we can get into the early versus the afternoon slates.
Yeah, I remember when I first started playing Showdown, I kind of really played very lightly with it, and it was kind of like, man, I don't really like this. A lot of it too is because if you get really close to taking one down, or even take one down, you're probably chopping it up with 4 or 5 people, and that can be super frustrating. But I think as I've kind of gone on last year, and as things kind of progressed, I started to learn things and really learn, because I feel like that Showdown, there's still a lot of edge there because it's so new and people don't really quite understand how to play it yet. I can set my watch almost. I can figure out, really quickly who's going to be the highest owned on a slate. But I think, trying to come up with different ways to maximize your lineups is really a way to go. And one thing I really started doing a lot last year that I'm going to do a ton of this year, I kind of put this out in the Slack chat already, is running clusters. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're wanting to run 20 lineups, or, you're going to max enter the 20 entry. So what I would do is I would probably play 4 or 5 of the same lineup and run that one lineup 4 or 5 times, and then pick another lineup 4 or 5 times, or however you want to do it. That way, if that lineup crushes and you end up, and that lineup sort of spike, instead of you chopping it up that one lineup with 20 people, now you have far more exposure to it, and you're getting more ROI, return on investment, because of that lineup did so well. And I feel like with Showdown, that's really a way you should do it, like almost like a lineup train, as you would in cash, right? Doing kind of the same thing, because if the worst would be you took it down, you tied with 40 other people, and you went from, what would have maybe been a $5, $10, $15, $20,000 spike turns into like a $2,000 spike, and you're still happy with that, but it's not, you're still tilting because you just took down a GPP or a tournament, and you're chopping up with all these people. So I just feel like that's another edge that you can get, that I don't really see a whole lot of, that I really started running last year. And then I honestly would avoid playing defenses in Showdown. I know a lot of people want to, because they feel like that they can get that 7, 8, and 10 points from them or something like that. But generally speaking, on most weeks, they're never really going to be worth it. Same with kickers. I would much rather try to find that 1K guy, that 1,500, that 15, 2K, whatever. Try to find those guys, because when those guys hit, for example, like I remember vividly last year, the Steelers and Chargers game. It just stands out in my mind, 'cause that's the one that I actually almost took down. I ended up finishing third, and there was a lot of people that wanted to play like the kickers in that game and stuff like that. And my lineup ended up being, I had Antonio Brown in the captain spot, which he went ham.
The nuts.
Keenan Allen went ham, and I had him. I think I had Big Ben. But instead of playing, I played Justin Jackson. Everybody played Austin Eckler. That was the game that Justin Jackson went out and played very well. I think he scored a touchdown. He was like 5% owned. And then I played Travis Benjamin, who nobody wanted to play. He was like 1% owned in that game. And he went out and scored a 60-yard touchdown. And like, I just feel like there's much more upside in some of these guys than you are a defense who's going to give you 6 to 8 points, because chances are that they're not going to be in the winning lineup. And that's what we're trying to do, is take it down, right? And so we're trying to build the most optimal lineup. And so I never play defenses. I mean, unless it's like a Titans versus Jags type of game or something like that. For the most part, I just will never play that kind of a lineup. And I feel like there's certain edges you can get. Like I know a lot of people want to play a quarterback as in the captain spot, but I think more often than not, that also is not the most optimal strategy. I feel like playing either the running back or the wide receiver, and generally a lot of times you can get some of those guys cheaper than what you can the quarterback. So for me, like I said, like the one thing I'm going to really, really be focusing on is probably running the clusters. And I think that is going to be a way to kind of differentiate yourself and bring in more money than what you are, that maybe you wouldn't necessarily would have. Because, generally speaking, when I would run lineups last year, I would kind of mix them up a little bit. And then I would get frustrated because I'd have a lineup that finished decently well, but you're splitting up with so many people that I was like, man, if I just would have played this multiple times. And this is not a strategy a lot of people go with. So I think it's really kind of following to see which way they were, what lineups are working every week. Like I said, there's never a week that I would probably play captain, tight end, just because their ceiling is pretty low, unless it's like a week where you have like Travis Kelce, or there's just a smash spot for George Kittle or something like that. It's either the captain's always going to be a running back or wide receiver for me.
Travis Kelce versus the Giants. Smash. You lucked out with that. I was going back because I actually wanted to see, because I was at that game. That the first time Pittsburgh had lost the game at home by being up at half by the lead that they had. It was brutal. But yeah, there were only 2 field goals made in that game, only 3 attempted. So you really lucked out by fading, let's just say 25% of the field. I'm sure it was more of the field that actually took 1, if not 2 kickers on their lineups. So that was the nuts. Keenan Allen and Antonio put on a show. Kev, you're on mute.
I said I was actually on with that lineup. I was actually in first, like going up until the end. And I think the last drive, if I remember correctly, they hit Keenan Allen for a couple plays, and I was just tilted.
Yep.
I was like so pissed because I mean I had Keenan Allen in the lineup, but I just didn't have him in the captain spot. So
in the captain spot. Yeah, that was filthy. So nasty. Um, Early versus afternoons. I want to talk about this before we close it out, Kev, just real briefly. And like you said earlier, this is really a way to take advantage of some things that you're seeing. You know, if you like a particular roster construction and you really want to build around it, but don't want to have to, you know, you don't want to worry about the San Francisco Tampa Bay game affecting what you think is a perfect stack here. If you can play that on the early and just take out that game where everybody's looking to go to and really just getting something that you like. So with early and the afternoon slates, I really enjoy them. The early especially, it's so easy to take advantage of where the field is going to be going because of the games that start early and big names that play early. So, you know, when you're looking at guys like a Travis Benjamin, for example, like getting on a player like that in the early slate, if they pop and you have, you know, one or two things that are kind of different, or you stacked a game that nobody was really thinking about stacking, or it's just so nice. I can't think of another word to think about it, but it feels good when you have something that's going and you don't have to factor in these later games, or vice versa. If you're playing in the afternoon slate only, you don't have to worry about anything that's going on in the early morning and people just focused in on getting their teams in for the main slate, because that's usually what people are doing, or they're tilt entering the afternoon slate, which happens a ton, where you're not making anything in these first couple of games and you're like, man, I really need to figure this out and really spike on the afternoon. So what's a good way for people to attack that, Kev, if they're looking at getting into that and they're not really used to playing those short end slates, or they're not used to they're just trying to figure out how to attack it, because you only have 4 games to choose from or 5 games to choose from when you're talking about the afternoon. And if you don't have an appropriate game stack, you might just lose it. So what are some ways that people can kind of, you know, set themselves apart or set themselves up for success in these shorter game slates?
yeah, so I mean, I think so. Again, like if you create another player pool, but like if there were some players that you were on earlier in the week or you got onto that were on these late slates, then I think you hammer those players, you know, in this. And I think there's some edge to be had because, you know, ownership's going to be a lot higher because you're talking about a much smaller slate. So, you know, if, for example, if one of your quarterbacks in your core happen to be somebody that you probably project that's going to be pretty low owned, because generally speaking, there's usually, especially because a lot of the times it's like three or four games in that afternoon slate. And so ownership is skewed pretty heavily, where if like the Chargers are on it and they have a really great matchup, but then like, let's say it's like Seattle and another terrible matchup, like where you start to, like you could see like Phillip Rivers, for example, owned 40% or something like that.
Right.
There's edge to be had there because I feel like that you know, fading, some of that chalk that you see there and eating, you know, and figuring out different ways to go. I feel like there's just a good edge there. Another thing that, as you were talking about the late slate, it crossed my mind, you know, that to mention, because it's something that, you know, not everybody knows to do. I think most of us that have been playing DFS long enough understand this, but in terms of the late slate is understanding late swap and when and where to use that. If, you know, we always talk about it, we always say it, your flex spot should always be a guy, you know, from that 4 o'clock game. If you're utilizing players from those 3 o'clock kickoffs, they definitely should, you need to have one of them in your flex. And, you know, that we talk about like the late night hammer is kind of what we say with that. But utilizing late swap is such a smart way to go. Not many people use it. If they've had a like kind of rough afternoon, instead of going back into some of those dead lineups that you feel like that have no shot, going back in and utilizing late swap is certainly a strategy to go with that not a lot of people do. A lot of people, after they've had a rough slate, like you said, they will go enter a bunch of, you know, afternoon only stuff, and to kind of make up some of the losses that they may have just taken, instead of, you know, utilizing late swap, which is such an essential tool, because I think people that you know, quote unquote sharks, that's what they're doing. They're going back into their lineups and they're usually utilizing late swap, where most people don't. They just kind of, oh, whatever, those lineups are dead. I don't care anymore. I'm going to let those guys go. Where you could really gain an edge, or even if you're high up and you have a great lineup and you can go before those 4 o'clock games or 3 o'clock games kick off, you go and see who's ahead of you and see what players they're using. And you can kind of make an educated guess on probably who they have there just by kind of looking at their team. You understand how much money they have left. You can pretty much narrow it down, even though it doesn't show you until lock. You can pretty much tell exactly who they have. And if everybody ahead of you, let's say, for example, there's 20 people ahead of you and they all have, you can pretty much think they all have, let's say, Melvin Gordon, for example, and you have Melvin Gordon in your lineup. I think it's very smart to jump off that, because you're never going to catch them. You're never going to gain on those people, right? You're just going to stay where you're at, and moving off of them and maybe going to a lesser owned player and kind of utilizing late swap that way as well is also very smart. So I cannot stress enough utilizing late swap whenever you're in like a main slate and being able to do that, because it really makes a difference and it really can set you apart and, you know, and another avenue to maximize your chances each week.
Yes, that's so key, Kev. I'm so glad you hit on that. We cannot do an hour pod without talking about one of the most important rules. If you have the later player, play him in your flex so you can swap him out or and whatnot. Kev, this has been fun, man. I mean, we really have, I feel like, painted the picture and given people a lot of information and a lot of different ways and avenues to take advantage of the slates that they're choosing to play on in particular. Are there any other final words that you want to say? Are there any other rules that are important to mention for people as they start to get into week one and start to do their research and really are excited for week one DFS to kick off?
I'm just ready to get this damn thing going. You know, I think a few things. What?
I said, amen, brother.
Yeah. Is, you know, be back next week. Jump into our Slack chat. It's popping. You know, it has been firing on all cylinders all preseason, and you know, people are in there just holding it down. And we've gotten into a point which I'm happy with, that we don't have to be in there at all times to run it, which is amazing. That we have such I don't mean that like I just want to be lazy and anything. It's just, it's good to actually have a community where people are all wanting to be in there and they're talking through things, or, you know, they'll hit us up if they have questions or whatever. And I think it's kind of like a big sounding board, and there's just a lot of use there. So yeah, I mean, it's free. There's really no risk to it. Just, you know, sign up. And, you know, if you like it, great. If you don't, you can bounce. It's cool. No harm, no foul. But it's such a useful tool. And I think it's one of the most valuable things that we have is our Slack chat, just because there's so much going on in there. There's so much conversation. There's really, you know, I think it puts your thought process every week, you know, together, and, you know, kind of see where other people are at and try to look, okay, well, what got them on that player, if it's not somebody that entered your mind to play or something you found, to try to figure out. So I think there's a lot of usefulness there. And also, by the way, people that are, you know, still here listening, you know, hit us up in the comments. We see all the comments now with StreamYard. It comes right in. For example, this very smart person, Let's Go Terps, you know, he said, oh, look, it's the best fantasy football draft of all time. He's talking about me there, in case you didn't know. That was from last night, but shout out. So Let's Go Terp. And, but yeah, so if you guys are on here and you guys, you know, if you want to drop any comments, anything in, you know, we're here, and we'll answer any questions that you guys have. And I'm really looking forward to week one. It's going to be lit. We're going to have such a good time. You know, let's win that money, because that's what we're here for. I want to see everybody spike, everybody, you know, have a great year. I want to see them screenshots after week one, because we're going to crush.
Let's get that money. You said it best, Kev. Just remember, guys, DGen Nation Pod. That's where you can find us on Twitter. My handle at Ryan Alexander _W. Kev's handle at Fantasy Wrath 13. And it's just very important that you guys know the website, thefantasyauthority.com. That's where we're going to be dropping DFS articles for you guys every week. You can just click on the tab, find the articles there. I will be back writing the Contrary 10, where I take 10 contrarian players on the main slates and kind of just go through what I'm seeing and what I'm finding. We'll also have a ton of other content that's coming to you guys. And I'll be sure to mention that next week on the pod, so you guys know exactly how and where and when to find it. But other than that, DJ Nation, we're excited to be back for the regular season. We're excited to be back with you, and we want you guys in that Slack chat, as Kev said. Hit up the DMs. We'll get you guys in there. It is free to join. So we really appreciate that. We appreciate all the love for everybody. Rate and review the pods. Welcome us to Streambird. We're going to be giving you this type of content every week now. So this is exciting to give you guys a platform to view the pod, not only on your podcast software, iTunes, Stitcher, what have you, but you can also now check us out on YouTube, on Periscope, and other video avenues that we'll be talking about. It's the DJ Nation pod. It's episode 56. Strategy came for you. We're ready for week 1. We'll be back next week, and we are out.